Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, our old pal, commentary podcast originator, senior editor at National Review, and I like to think of him as our left-wing violence correspondent because he has been writing for commentary and the website on the subject of left-wing domestic violence for a decade, in article after article. Our own Noah Rothman. Hi, Noah.
Hi, John. Jeez. You really put everything in perspective there. A decade.
It's been a decade.
I don't know if is domestic violence what how we want to characterize
well,
it.
I meant
perhaps
not. Terrorism. Terrorism is not his. International terrorism is not his subject. Right. Domestic civil violence. How is that? Civil violence on our shores.
Terroristic. Yeah.
Domestic extremism.
Okay, it's terroristic too. All right. So.
Both of them will get a knock at your door from local cops.
Day 4 of the meltdown of Los Angeles. And now the issue has turned into a very complicated political football because since the Trump administration announced that it was deploying the California National Guard over the objections of the state's governor or 2,000 members of the National Guard. It has also announced the deployment of 700 Marines, which takes this to a very interesting and genuinely unprecedented place. The use of American members of the American military. There are at least 2 laws on the books dating back to the 19th century to prevent or to make it extraordinarily difficult for the president to do what he just did yesterday. And I guess he will be invoking them if he is challenged in court, that the military is not to be used as a domestic law enforcement agency. And on the other hand, I think we are back in the Rorschach test world, ideological world that our partisan divisions have caused, which is that I think probably if you talk to us and most people on the center right and correspondents, congressmen, senators, all of that from the center to the right, you would hear that they think that the Democratic Party has gone insane in not speaking out more forthrightly about the nature of the violence that is being enacted in the streets of Los Angeles against federal law enforcement officers, and in an effort to make difficult, if not impossible, their assigned task. And then I think on the people from the center to the left believe that this is the Trump administration overreaching to the extent that it may be running a test drive of its authoritarian desire to suspend the Constitution and habeas corpus and to militarize our cities and take them over and lead us into an age of 1,000-year darkness. Noah.
I mean, well, that's the worst thing about it, right? Is that both parties want to project the worst image of themselves onto the American political landscape and convey to the voting public, and particularly their activists at the core of their base, that they are wholly uncompromising and utterly deaf and blind to the appeals of good government types and civic activists. Because the situation now is just so dire that these are what the times demand. There is a lot of theater here, and these are small stages. There is something to be said for it was really contemptuous, the degree to which we heard journalists and political observers say, Los Angeles is really, really big, and just because a couple of blocks are on fire doesn't mean the whole city's on fire. I don't know what the implication there is that their neighbors shouldn't care if their city is on fire, that riots aren't a social contagion that will expand if they're not arrested, if their expansion is not arrested. I mean, it was, as journalism, it's smart because we all encounter the people who watch too much cable news and think that if you go to Chicago, you will be assaulted, 100% chance. So there isn't a journalistic element to that, but that's not what they were trying to do, right? They were trying to convey to you that you shouldn't care about these things. But at the same time, we've seen reports that these deployments of National Guardsmen, for example, they're not actively engaged in riot control. Not yet. They're really taking a support role, which they probably should. But the Trump administration doesn't want you to know that. They want you to think that they're completely engaged and completely 100% secure in their belief that they can put these riots down with maximum force. Even if they're not, they want you to think that. Democrats who are running block for these protesters, and they are running block for these protesters, the degree to which they presume to speak for them, make excuses for them, imply by saying, listen, you're giving them what they want, right? What they're saying there is, you could listen to reason. We're all on the same side. You're making our lives so much more difficult, guys. Just be normal, and we can all seek our shared objectives together. They're saying that these people are on our team, that these are the shock troops. You don't want to make them mad because this is the force we hold in reserve. This is our deterrent. And all of this is theatrical to a certain degree, but it's a very menacing sort of theater. And it's the sort of thing that could evolve into a real dangerous condition if the cosplayers here start to buy their own hype.
Well, on the theatrical point, especially on the part of the politicians. So this is a question I have. So everyone's reporting Trump has indicated that he may want to arrest Gavin Newsom if he objects to the National Guard and the Marines in California. Now, I'm trying to get the timeline right. Didn't Newsom first say, then come arrest me? Yeah,
yes.
Right?
He said it to Tom
Homan.
Yeah.
Right.
He said it to Tom Homan, the head of ICE, not to Trump.
That's his storyline, right? And Trump was responding to it, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that,
Right. Okay. So on that, there's Newsom saying, "Come arrest me," and then Trump says Gavin Newsom should be arrested. And then it's like, oh my God, Trump said Gavin Newsom should be arrested. Then there's Kristi Noem, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, saying L.A. is a city of criminals. She literally went on TV last night and said L.A. has gone from being a city of immigrants, which it is not, to being a city of criminals, which it is not. And she is the head of the Department of Homeland Security, in which ICE is based. And yes, rhetoric verging on the psychotic is coming out on all sides. These statements that say, we need our immigrants, when ICE's job is literally to police immigration in the United States, to divide between lawful and unlawful immigrants. I mean, to say these people are unlawfully here and we have the right and the power and the need in some cases to remove them or to detain them or to do whatever because they are in violation of American law. That part of the federal government, and remember, isn't government just the things that we all do together? Isn't that what both that Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have said? Government is just the name of the things that we do together. So aren't ICE agents just part of what we do together? Apparently not. Apparently what we're supposed to do.
Aren't we all ICE agents when you think about it? When it really comes down to it.
There is an argument to be made that, yeah, you are living next door to somebody who's here illegally and you have the perfect right to call the authorities to say, I think my neighbor is here illegally. That is like calling and saying, somebody is dealing drugs out of the next apartment. They are in violation of the law. And that's just, let's just make this clear, because as I've said for 10 years on this podcast, like I am at root as dovish as you can possibly be on immigration. But if you move into a frame in which you have decided to take something that was once a crime that was prosecuted or looked at glancingly because of a sort of national consensus that it didn't really matter all that much and that resources should be allocated to other things, then you have a national election in which it's the main or one of the two main issues, and the public votes for a different stance on illegal immigration, like it's time to get really, really tough about it. And the previous administration had let 6 to 7 to 8 million people in and let them through, and they escaped into the country. You don't have a leg to stand on. Trump won the election. He has the one mandate that I think we know he has is to get tough on illegal immigration. And all of these local officials are saying, no, you don't have the right to do this. Immigration is a national law enforcement obligation, right? It could use help. It could use help from local authorities because, you don't necessarily want Border Patrol agents, in cities in the north. They're not on the border doing whatever it is that they're doing. So it would be nice if local law enforcement helps. But it's not necessary. They have absolute authority to do what they do, to stage a raid on a warehouse where people are working, to arrest them and deport them. It's their job.
But this is where Noah's point about the theatricality of some of both sides in this conflagration is at risk of slipping into actual trouble. I don't think our head of our Department of Homeland Security should spend as much time on cable news and social media as she should be in her office doing her job. She is a performative cabinet member. We have a lot of them in this administration. And that's perfectly harmless if they're doing something that doesn't have to do with, border security or homeland defense. And so I find it really annoying. I don't think it's just silly when she speaks like that. That hyperbole is dangerous. That rhetoric is not helping a situation. Trump loves it, though, and that's fine. As you said, he was elected and immigration was one of his most powerful issues. But there is, on the left, this tendency to think that the what's been the conventional wisdom about illegal immigration for so long, and particularly in states like California, which is that it won't be enforced, or if so, only half-heartedly, they're suddenly feeling provoked because the raids are happening. Local officials do not have to help federal ICE enforcers. They don't, but they cannot obstruct them from doing their job. And that's what's changed now. So the left believes that they have a moral duty to obstruct federal officers from performing their role, and they do not. That's where I think the heart of this conflict requires level heads and different sorts of rhetoric that do get into the legal weeds a bit, because this is also a challenge of federalism, states' rights, the federal government's rights, and neither the state governor in California nor, unfortunately, a lot of Trump administration officials are talking about it in that way. They are posturing, as Noah said.
Christine, you raise a point that clarifies something for me. So one of my big overarching theses about left-wing violence and the degree to which Democrats imprudently embrace these movements because they look really like zealous. They look like they're displays of organic political zeal that can be harnessed and wielded towards their ends, and they always get burned by it. That's what happened to Occupy Wall Street. It's what happened in 2020. It's probably what's happening now, right? But we have all this evidence that indicates this is not an organic phenomenon. You had USAT, Bill Isley, who was on a California channel the other day, is saying, quote, "We're seeing a very sophisticated level of organization by union groups and other groups to mobilize people to violently resist our efforts to enforce immigration law here." And then you see a truck roll up with a pallet of brand new face shields for these people that just came out of nowhere. And then you see all these organizers who managed to drive crowds to Paramount City on the spur of a moment, based on a scanner traffic. And all of a sudden, everybody mobilizes into a little shock mob that accretes. That's organic. But the initial outburst is totally inorganic. It is contrived. So why would Democrats think they can generate any organic enthusiasm from the contrivance? It's a weird sort of situation they've talked themselves into.
If you build it, they will come. That is the nature of protesting in the internet era, because you start something, the images are broadcast through social media, and then text messages go out to say, come to 6th and Broad, or come to 4th and Main, or whatever. And so it's like you take kindling, right? You make a teeny little fire, then you show a picture of the fire. You say, hey, let's make this into a bonfire, and people show up with wood. That's new, right? That's a new organizing system and principle, and therefore you can take something that's inorganic, and I guess you can morph it into something organic over time, and it then doesn't really matter who the shock troops are. It's like if you're making the 10 Commandments and you need 20,000 extras to look like the Israelites at the sea, you just sweep anybody off the streets to come in and be your extra for the day. And what we see when you have these moments is, I don't think that the people who are doing this, in order to block ICE, particularly want to see looting in downtown LA, don't want to see Apple stores broken into and all of that. That complicates their message. Like, it's like, oh, there is real law, there is a real law breaking going on here. But that's what happens when you do sort of like an all hands on deck. We're having a big hootenanny, big anti-government, anti-everything hootenanny. Come on down, close off the 10 or the 101. And you know what? Officers are going to be so overwhelmed. Go get yourself an iPhone from the back of the Apple store. I mean, I'm just saying, like, this is what's been going on since 2020. You have a political cause that morphs into an anarchistic cause that then morphs into just absolute frenzied disorder, which is ultimately what anarchism is. And antinomianism, meaning, ICE is there to perform the duty that it has been chartered with, that its agents are sworn to, that it works in an administrative setting, that issues orders for it to do its job. You're not allowed to stand in the way. And then the question is, who's standing in the way? Is it citizens? Or is it like semi-governmental? You have local authorities standing in the way of federal authorities. What does that remind me of? What does that remind me of? Little Rock? University of Alabama desegregation? That's what they did. That's what the states' rights governors did as the country was attempting to desegregate. They said, you have no right to be here. You are interlopers. And I, George Wallace, the governor of the state of Alabama, will stand in the schoolhouse door to keep these little black children from coming through the door. Is that really what liberals and the left want to be emulating right now? Am I taking crazy pills?
Well, take more, because I want to add to the confusion, at least on my part. So Seth wrote a post yesterday that was great about how there's a lot of Palestinian flags and keffiyehs out there, which is its own issue. But I'm actually curious about, why are they waving Mexican and Salvadoran flags, actually, if the point is about wanting to stay in this country? That's a very strong. Why is it just a sea of foreign flags?
How about foreign flags that are in front of fire? That's the other thing, is these indelible images of having somebody wave a Mexican flag on a Los Angeles County street in front of a car that's been set on fire. Thus, as we've said, during the 600 days of the hostages' captivity, every now and then you get this image, and you're like, "Wait a minute, is this Jenin? Is this going on on the West Bank? Is this an anti-Israel protest on the West Bank?" Because you have, and then no, it's in a street in the United States. They're wearing keffiyehs, they have masks on, and they're waving Palestinian flags, but they're in Cambridge, and here you have. It's like, what message are you attempting to impart? That you want to bring Middle Eastern terroristic chaos to the streets of America? You think Americans are going to cotton to that? You want to wave a Mexican flag as part of the I just want to be in America to make a better life for my children?
Also, I think that there's not to bring everything back to blaming Harvard and the universities, but I think we should come back to blaming everything on Harvard for a second and the universities, because what I'm seeing, one of the things that they set, one of the precedents they set was that you negotiate with these people. That's the other part of the sort of importation of, Middle Eastern politics or whatever. For Americans, like John, you're right, this is all kind of posing. This is all kind of like cosplay in a way. But the universities said, all right, let's negotiate with them. There's a bunch of people in a library at Columbia, and they're drawing swastikas and assaulting security guards and calling the security guards Jew lovers. Let's see what they want. Maybe they just want a better menu at the CAF. Maybe, it's like, and that naivete just sort of caught on like its own virus. And Trump, it's not that Trump or even Gavin Newsom or anybody involved in this is even thinking about negotiating with the protesters. It's that the rioters are thinking about how they've been negotiated with in the past. The organizers of this have had success over the past nearly 2 years, or the past 20 months, getting administrations to hold off on sending law enforcement and saying, well, let's talk. Well, let's have a Zoom call. And then Mahmoud Khalil will pick up the phone and he'll be a negotiator on behalf of this, while they're occupying a building at Columbia. The whole thing is incredibly ridiculous. But I really do think that the willingness to negotiate over the past 20 months, rather than send the cops in, has created a sense of entitlement to occupation in these people's heads.
Look, I think blaming Harvard and the universities for everything doesn't go far enough, because what I'll add here is that's their line, is we negotiate, we don't bring in the cops. Look, Harvard has been preaching a doctrine of conflict resolution, getting to yes. Roger Fisher, there was a whole school of international relations thought that you can do. And then, of course, the hot term in criminal jurisprudence over the last 15 years, deconfliction. A lot of public decay. The important thing is the cops need to be trained in deconfliction, so they can go somewhere and do now. Deconfliction, by the way, is not a bad idea in core. Like, every cop shouldn't show up at a door if there's a domestic violence claim, like with the guns pulled, and like shove a gun in somebody's face when they open the door. Maybe there's a way that they can help lower the temperature in the situation. But deconfliction is a tool and a toolkit. And so is intimidation. And it's not just that they are doing this, they've done this on campus because they want to be negotiated with. They're setting the stage as the intimidators of these desiccated, corrupt, bureaucratic institutions. All they want is to get to Martha's Vineyard for their vacation, or to get to their conference on deconfliction in Paris, where they're going to be in a nice hotel and have a really delicious croissant breakfast, and then listen to people with headphones as everybody talks about what it is that's important to them. They just want life to go back to normal. And the promise of the negotiation is maybe we can just get life back to normal. And the threat that is posed by the demonstrators and the people they want to negotiate with is, we'll make sure your life never gets back to normal. Okay, your life is never getting back to normal.
But in LA, there's something else going on, which is back to normal for a lot of the people protesting, not the ones who are doing violent things and setting Waymo cars on fire, but the people who are showing up because they actually want more liberalized immigration. They don't want any enforcement now. Their normal was that there was no enforcement for decades. And so they have friends and family members who came here illegally, settled, work, had kids, and so there is a contingent of the crowd that are those people. I don't think they're generally violent. However, the thing that we're not talking about is that in LA, the elite class are the people like the mayor, like the prosecutors in LA, who actually have to enforce their local laws. And that's what they also haven't done for years. So it's not, the problem isn't necessarily, and Karen Bass, I believe, did talk to some of the factions involved, like the union organizers in particular, as Noah points out, the organized left wing types. But that's not going to matter if they don't arrest. There were not as many arrests as you would think when you sort of look at the footage and coverage of these of past several days. They need to arrest the people who are breaking the law. They need to prosecute those people. And that's why I think, and this is where I am sympathetic to bringing in the National Guard, if the local law enforcement and local prosecutors are not pursuing and prosecuting these crimes, then you actually do need to bring in backup from the federal government to protect the ICE workers and the federal buildings so that the federal government can do its job of enforcement on immigration. I think most Americans believe that's necessary if they see that. The Trump administration has not been great about articulating it in that way. And I think that would be helpful. I don't think they'll do it. But that's
you're
where,
right. But they haven't been doing that because of what Noah talked about.
Right.
They
I just think there's a paradigmatic
people to say, "Oh, look, we've sent. This is literally westerns, right? This is American westerns. You're in a lawless town. What do you want? The cavalry. Where's the cavalry? The Deus ex machina of the third act. The cavalry rides in and helps straighten things out. Or if they don't show up, then you've got John Wayne or Gary Cooper, the one gun guy with his tubercular doctor, helping to straighten things out, because they're outnumbered by the bad guys. But there's always in the air the idea that the cavalry, that is the federal government, can come and save you from the lawlessness that is broken out in Tombstone or whatever the town is in High Noon or whatever. That is part of the Donald Trump world fantasy, right? Is that he's living in a Hollywood movie. He's got the cavalry. He's sending in the cavalry. As Noah said, they're not really the cavalry because all they're really there to do is to facilitate ICE's actions, by which I mean they're there to cut a path so that ICE is not attacked by people as they go and do a raid. I'm sorry?
And LAPD riot control. They're taking
and LAPD riot, same thing. And again, we also have this bizarre division between the mayor of LA and the police chief of LA. The police chief of LA is saying, this is terrible. We're overwhelmed. And the mayor's like, this is all Trump's fault. Don't look at me. I was on vacation during the Pacific Palisades fires, and I'm on theoretical vacation here. And this is where we should talk a little bit about the madness of the Democratic Party's response here. Because what are they doing? Can somebody?
So Christine said something that I think is really resonant. I'm taking all my cues from you today, Christine. That I think Democrats really genuinely do think that these are expressions of peak, perhaps a little excessive, but within them is the nucleus of a concerned citizenry that really wants to see some dramatic political change and doesn't know how to affect it. And their motives are genuinely good. But maybe they've been caught up in the moment, or maybe they themselves are a little confused. Nevertheless, their instincts are righteous and they should be adopted, embraced, and certainly trained on our enemies because they're an effective force. But that doesn't make a ton of sense because of what they're doing, right? If you were a genuinely concerned citizenry, you would be using the mechanisms of civil mechanisms and governmental mechanisms to voice your concerns and engage in process, right? These people are contemptuous of process. They seem rather resentful of the structures of civil society and probably want to tear them down more than they want to participate in them. So there's this paradigmatic problem that Democrats have succumbed to, and which the right is increasingly adopting, which is to confuse these anarchistic expressions for political potency that they can appropriate for themselves. Both, and this is making all our politics increasingly worse. And as I've been writing for a decade, as you said, John, it's been making our politics increasingly worse. Part because the coalitions are so narrow that nobody feels like they can afford to jettison even the most unlovely member but also because they're genuinely confused about what political activism should look like and who political activists are. They see these anarchistic elements as increasingly mainstream political activists. They're not. They don't want to participate in this political process. They're a millstone around your neck. They need to be jettisoned. All you need is the courage to look at these people and say, they are not my people. And that's what Democrats can't bring themselves to do. They see these people as part of their coalition. That's why they're saying, you're making my life difficult. You're giving Donald Trump what he wants. We are in this together, guys. What are you doing? They have to completely reconceptualize the situation and look at these cast of malcontents, this mob of barbarians, and say, you are not one of my people.
Well, and that's where the moral relativism comes in, and you see people all the way up to Gavin Newsom not saying violence and riots are bad, just full stop. They're saying violence and riots are bad because it makes our side look bad. Not because politically, it's not.
That's not what people think. No,
but I don't
Riots are
even
not
know
helping.
because riots are bad.
Not helping. That's what every tweet is.
Right.
Not helping.
But you're
They think they want to help. They don't want to help.
But you're conveying a message I don't think they're conveying. I don't hear them saying riots are bad, but protest is good. I mean, I know they're saying it, but what I hear is this is all Trump's fault. That's all I'm hearing, and I think that is all the country is hearing is it's Trump versus Newsom, it's Trump versus Bass. Okay? So yeah, if you hate Trump, anything Trump does is Trump, and you hate Trump, and so Trump. And of course, Democrats live in a anti-Trump bath, and everything that they know, everything they, every bath bomb, every odor, every shampoo, everything is from the same.
Sensing a new product
vendor.
line in our future. Okay.
There we go. Okay. That's not what happens when you turn on your TV or you're on your social media and you see people dropping bricks off a overpass, smashing cars, cop cars. What you see is somebody arrest those people. They're dropping bricks on cop cars. They're raining things down 20 feet. People in uniform are being threatened with their lives by literal gravity, with bricks being dropped off a bridge over an overpass. Like,
But
that
by the
is
way-
Right. There's a scene in The Wire where they're at the towers. The cops are at these project towers, and they're like, there's just a couple cops, and they pull up and they're like, oh, we have them. They're just in this tall high-rise building. What are they going to do? Jump out the window of the 28th floor? Where are they going to go? And then toasters start falling from the 28th floor and practically go through the roof of the police vehicle because of the velocity. When you see that, it sounds ridiculous to be having a discussion over whether somebody needs the National Guard or whether the cops need help, because we're watching cops huddle under an overpass because they can't come out. So normal people see that and say, somebody.
I thought when I was watching that footage, I swear to God, I thought that it was AI. I said, this isn't really happening. AI is really good. If you saw it's really good. And so or it's a clip from a movie or something like that, because it's so naked. And what's more, you can kind of make out the faces of the people who are dropping the bricks. So they're going to get made, and they're going to get, arrested, not only for vandalism, but for attempted murder.
But there's an issue here, though.
And they'll get arraigned.
Well,
Yeah,
federal
that's
crime.
they're going to
That's
actually
all
get
they can
prosecuted.
expect.
Could be a federal crime.
There's
Assaulting
another-
a law enforcement officer can be raised to a federal crime. So that would be taken out of the hands of the LA prosecutors. Anyway,
There's an additional issue here. We're talking about seeing images and what they convey. Not everyone is seeing the same images. We're seeing those images of the bricks being launched and cars being set afire. I see them on right-wing social media. I have liberal friends out in LA who send me, kumbaya style protest videos. When I turn on CNN, I don't see those. I don't see the bricks and the fires.
Oh, I saw the bricks on CNN. They showed the
Oh, you
footage
did?
of the bricks on CNN.
I did. Even if it's just B-roll.
I'm not denying you're right.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's local officials saying everything is okay while they play B-roll of
yeah.
well,
it's
structure
the
fires
greatest,
and missiles
it's the
raining down on
greatest
police.
meme ever, right? Which is Frank Drebin of Police Squad. A car drives into a fireworks factory and the fireworks factory explodes. So right behind him, all the fireworks are going off. And he's staying there saying, "Nothing to see here. Please disperse." And behind him is like the 4th of July fireworks show. There is a little bit of that. But even if a little of the bricks falling on the cops comes out, even if a little, also the mostly peaceful fires, the mostly peaceful.
But here's my question about those, about even if people see what's actually happening there, it goes to my favorite Noah phrase of all time, permission structures. What do you think, and this is a question for you, Noah, what sort of permission structure in the average normie mind do you think they are granting to the Trump administration to respond? Because that's where I think there's also, look, I know I'm going to get yelled. I've been getting nasty emails about saying, stop bringing up the right. But, he's in charge. He's the boss. He's setting the tone now. And if you have the firepower and the leadership to do that, you do have to be careful. It doesn't mean that you're not right to call out people like Newsom and the horrible Karen Bass. But I'm curious, Noah, what permission structure do you think the average, center right, center left voter wants to see in this situation, which is getting more and more volatile?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I mean, when you talk about the average center-right voter, I'm not thinking of someone who is inclined towards extraordinary measures, who spends all their day on Twitter talking themselves up into a froth over how, we need to subvert the Constitution in order to save it, or that, just posturing for the benefit of an audience. But I think those people are overrepresented in this White House and have the president's ear more than they should. So I don't think that the president is necessarily formulating policy that's reflective of the average quote unquote normie citizen. I think the normie Republican voter wants to see law and order established and wants to do so within the terms of engagement that are set for local law enforcement and the very distinct terms of engagement that are set for National Guards when they have to intervene in extraordinary circumstances where an emergency is declared. That's where I think the average voter is. That's rule of law. I don't think that's necessarily where the Trump administration's provocateurs are. They want to make a statement. They want a big showy display to brandish their own bona fides and also to grease the skids for a lot of the stuff that I think they genuinely do want to do. They're testing the bounds of Article 2 everywhere they can. They want to reclaim as much power for Article 2 as they can, which, by the way, the founders would recognize and say, well, that makes perfect sense. We should expect to see the branches accumulate as much power for themselves and jealously steward it. That's a whole system. The whole reason why the system is breaking down right now is because one of those articles doesn't want to do that, which is very weird. That's a different discussion.
That's Article 1. That's the Congress is what you're referring
Congress.
to there. Yeah.
Okay. But within the administration, your Stephen Miller types, even your Pete Hegseth types, and certainly the subordinates within the Defense Department, they want permission, a permission structure, if you will, to do the stuff that they talk about on cable news, and to be able to be feted for it and receive laurels for it. They do need circumstances to be more amenable to that sort of situation. So they have a tendency to jump at any of these opportunities. Unfortunately, these opportunities are going to continue to present themselves. Read Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times opinion page this morning. What is she talking herself into?
No, he's right.
I don't think those rioters are reading the New York Times opinion page. I
Read
don't
it,
think they're reading the Atlantic.
Just summarize it so I don't have to read it because I've lost enough brain cells already this morning.
I mean, I don't want to do her argument injustice, but I will say that what she's talking...
do her argument justice?
What she's talking herself into is another summer of love. Because resistance is what any civic-oriented citizen would engage in this moment, if you were to believe what she's talking herself into.
Well, this is a very important thing because I talked about this yesterday, that the moment, the moment for passionate advocates of liberal to left-wing civic order and civic action is the 1960s. And there's a great deal of nostalgia from people who weren't born then, but have studied it, have been indoctrinated in the glories of 60s direct action and all of that. And they every time we have one of these moments, like you mentioned, Occupy Wall Street, Ferguson, Black Lives Matter, there is about it we're getting our 60s. This is our 60s. I'm so excited. I'm going to be out there with 500,000 people, and there and as the camera pulls back, the soundtrack will play. Come on, people now, smile on your brother, everybody. This total just as people like us often have a kind of nostalgic reaction to the American culture of the Second World War, they have it toward the 60s. That's part of their permission structure, but permission structures are dynamic. So by which I mean, they have a permission structure which says you must go in the street. It is noble to go in the streets. It is noble to occupy your campus. You are doing something that puts you in the, you are standing on the shoulders of giants, and maybe you can, be enlisted as part of their number. History will enlist you as part of their number if you do what they did and you stop the horrors.
But I have to interrupt, because a lot of the people I see on the streets of LA and on a lot of those campus protests, they're not 60s hippies, or even the children. I mean, they might be the children of 60s hippies, but they are a nihilist, sort of permanent.
So were the 60s hippies.
Right.
That's the point.
I do,
it was
but
all
I don't
nonsense.
think they even know the history. I mean, they're there because, I think this is where it gets into the omni cause. They might be using the same techniques, but if you marry, I think it's actually the elite who are the former hippies. And they have that. It's the Michelle Goldberg's writing about this in this, sort of gauzy way. But the shock troops are actually these, some of them are Antifa, but a lot of them are just these young nihilists who will protest anything. They'll protest Israel, they'll protest climate, they'll protest whatever is convenient.
But the root is protest. The protest culture became a mass cultural phenomenon in the 1960s, largely because of the Vietnam War, some of it because of civil rights. And there is a sense of terrible loss among people who view that as the most glorious time in American history, that they want to participate in it. I'm not saying so. When
There's
I
a
say
ton of revisionism to that, though, too, and this goes back to the universities being the problem. Where did the SDS go? Right, and they went to the universities, where they engaged in a revisionist history that
they were started. SDS was started at the University.
We're seeing, go back to the Harvard. We're seeing their signs. Bring the war home is an SDS sign.
Right. So
SDS, so holding up Gaza. Bring the war home.
But the revisionism is that the protest movement in the late 60s, early 70s, the violent protest movement worked. Right.
It ended the war. It ended a war.
Not in 1968.
Yeah, not only didn't it end a war in 1968, the war candidate won in they were both kind of war candidates, whatever. Okay, but I just want to say it's a dynamic, the permission structure, because you're talking about what they want to do, and then there is what they get from the other side that provides them with the permission structure. Let me just read you. A friend of mine sent this from LA late last night, something that was sent to her saying, hey, come join us. Or actually, this was yesterday. Stand up, fight back. It's a poster. ICE is systematically violating human rights. We will not be intimidated. We will not be silenced. Rally Monday, June 9th, Grand Park, Assembly 11 a.m., rally 12 p.m., 200 North Grand, Los Angeles, California. We demand the immediate release of David Huerta and other unjustly detained individuals, humane treatment and access to legal counsel for detainees, and end to raids that devastate communities and families. Free David Huerta is the hashtag. Free them all. We will not be silenced. And this is the kind of thing that was sent out to, nice Jewish 60-year-old people in Hancock Park, that they should go out and join in the fray, hoping that they would have exactly this nostalgia. Those crowds give Stephen Miller the jet fuel. They're saying this is all Trump's fault, right? Newsom, Bass, this is all Trump's fault. He's stirring up the pot here. Well, let's say that's true. I don't think it's true, but let's say it's true. So they are providing him with every possible justification to go at this twice as hard, not only in California, but across the country, ICE raids across the country, any effort to interpose or interdict the ICE raids is then an act like California that must be opposed. And maybe you can bring out the National Guard if local officials aren't going to do it. We already have here in New York, Kathy Hochul the governor has played a little bit of the same tune on her piccolo about how ICE is doing bad things. ICE, again, is a agency of the federal government tasked with enforcing the laws of the United States. And elected officials in the United States are siding with people who say that it is not only legitimate, it is moral, and it is necessary to interfere with the administration of their duties. And that is a golden issue for Republicans. It is gold. It is an 80% gold issue for Republicans to stand athwart that. And it means that if they play fast and loose with some of the constitutional niceties, the public is going to be on their side.
I mean,
because
even
it's
before we
like,
had an
you're either,
immigration
are you
crisis.
for dropping the bricks on cars or are you not? Are you for getting illegal immigrants out of the United States or are you not? That's a 60, 70% issue with the public. And Harry Enton yesterday pointed out that on immigration, Trump has gone from negative 20 to nearly zero since March.
Plus one.
Excuse me.
Minus 21 to plus one.
21,
He crossed the line.
23-point shift in Trump's direction on who is better to handle immigration issues.
Before we had an immigration crisis, before we had a pronounced uptick in lawlessness and disorder from the right and the left, but mostly the left, ICE, abolish ICE, defund the police. These slogans were bandied about for 6 years. We've been talking about this for the better part of a decade. We have no evidence that these slogans, shibboleths, do anything other than radicalize the opposition to the progressive left. They're not political winners. We have data, reams of data, to say nothing of anecdotal experience to justify that, to demonstrate that. And yet they're still beholden to it. It's
here's the
so
June 12th,
counterproductive, it's almost suicidal.
The famous June 12th, 2020 op-ed by one of the organizers in the New York Times, and the headline is, "Yes, we mean literally abolish the police."
Yeah, right.
But abolish ICE was a progressive 2018 thing.
Was early. That's right. Now, here the point I was making about Harry.
My point is that they went on this spin tour afterwards. That everything they said to abolish, we don't mean abolish. We're just trying to help people understand just how deep the rot runs and how much whatever. But they mean when they say abolish, they meant abolish.
This is Zoran Mamdani's thing, right? Where he wants
Zoran
to create
Mamdani
this
is the very liberal candidate for mayor in New York City who is now denying that he said that he wanted to defund and abolish the police.
No, what he wants to do is create a department of police social workers, because what he says is, listen, police are now doing all this social work. Whose idea was that?
Yeah.
That was your plan, dude.
Okay, look. The Harry Enton thing, I need to clarify. What he was saying was in June of 2017, Trump was 21 points underwater in favorability on immigration. In 2025, he is +1. So what does that tell you? The issue itself has moved like a freight train in his direction. Some of that, I don't think he's really responsible for that, except that he has held firm on his position. It is that the Democratic Party, the Biden people, all of that went insane, stopped enforcing the border. 6, 7, 8 million people come in through the border. A bunch of them are now in the country we have no visibility on them because they're called the gotaways. And even a dove like me looks at that and says, are you crazy? Trump always said, "Why do we have a border? If we don't have a border, we don't have a country." Right? That's a logic that I don't buy. But visas, we have visas for a reason. What is a visa? A visa is a limitation if you didn't have a visa system, right, there are countries from where we don't require visas from. But most we do, and the purpose of a visa is to limit your free access to all the rights and glories that the United States have to offer. Some of it is the limit is time, right? You're on a tourist visa, you can be here for a month. You're on a student visa, you can be here for a year. You're on a work visa, you can be here for whatever. But you're not here forever. And if you step 1 centimeter over the line, if you should jump a turnstile or get a speeding ticket or do anything that is violative of American law,
That's
enforcement officials in this country have the absolute right to send you home because you do not have a right to be in the United States. So
that's why the illegal immigrants in this story are almost tertiary to it.
Right.
You're not going to see a lot of illegal immigrants at these protests, if any. They're going to keep their heads down. That is a box you don't want to be in if you're an illegal immigrant. You don't want to peek your head up and get in front of law enforcement. Certainly don't have cuffs put on you.
Yeah. There's also this...
That's why the Mexican flags are all a ruse and pretty incoherent, at least geopolitically.
Yeah.
That this is not about illegal immigration. This is about
That's
law
why I think we should consider offering
the necessity of enforcing the law, the legitimacy of enforcing the law.
That's why I think we should consider offering to trade the Americans at the protests for the illegal immigrants. Offer them amnesty if we can send the Americans out.
But I'll give you an idea of how crazy this has become. There are 2 controversial cases in New York City, both supposedly high school students. We don't know anything about the second one, who was an 11th grader. We know something about the first one, who is 20 years old, but is a senior in high school or a junior in high school. 20 years old. So I'm like, I don't know. How were they detained? They were detained because they came in with their families on what is called a routine check-in with ICE. Okay? So why are there routine check-ins with ICE if you are here and you're in the system? To see if they need to throw you out. You don't have a routine check-in. And then it's like, no, that's not cricket. They're going in, they're following the rules, and they're getting detained. They're following the rules partially. I think they're following the rules because they're with their families, and maybe ICE or somebody discovered that they're part of a street gang, or they committed a crime, or something like that. ICE is not obliged to release information about them because they're not American. They don't have unlimited habeas corpus rights, right? I mean, because they violate, it says, if you violate your terms under the visa, you can be deported. So the sob story is, this is just not cricket. They did what they were supposed to do, which is come in for the routine. And it's supposed to be a routine check, meaning come in, we check you off, we say, did you commit any crime? You say no, you leave, right? And maybe they committed a crime. Maybe somebody informed them and said that they were, a member of a street gang. We don't know what the details are. But it's not like they're arresting or detaining every single person who comes in for the check. In fact, I assume they're not detaining 99% of the people who come in for the check.
This is where the absolute hypocrisy of the left drives me nuts, because suddenly they care about all the procedures. They care about whether they came in, they did what they're supposed to, and they still got deported, which, as you say, John, you're absolutely correct. ICE is allowed to deport them regardless. I mean, because they are visitors here. But they had no concern for any of this for 4 years under Biden when we had an open border. In fact, they deliberately looked away when people tried to show them what this meant. And I think that's where that hypocrisy, I think, is where, certainly for me, that's where I'm like, if the Trump administration has to use a heavy hand here to enforce the law that has been deliberately flouted for the last 4 years, to say nothing of the last several decades, then so be it. I just think, look, we also this Saturday are going to have this massive military parade here in D.C. The imagery that might work against the Trump administration right now is that very militaristic swagger. I think it's great for the Army to celebrate its birthday. I have no problem with that. But you would think he would be a little more, I shouldn't say cautious, but a little more aware of what that looks like. And to Noah's earlier point, I do think that the key is who has his ear. Who is telling him what he thinks he wants to hear and what he should be doing. And in that sense, his advisors might not be advising him well. And we should talk a little bit maybe about Hegseth and some of the others who are fueling this.
Look, I wish this were a different world. I wish he were not president in that sense. I wish he hadn't altered the nature of our response to the federal government. I wish we weren't living in this, alpha male universe in which showing yourself to be the biggest swinging whatever seems to be the be all and end all of the presidency. But it is. And it causes these responses on the other side that validate the alpha male behavior. So he says, I want to have a military parade. And they say, no, you can't have a military parade. Why are we? That's very militaristic. It's like, okay, I'm going to be on the side of the military. Whose side are you on? Haven't we been saying for 24 years, thank you for your service ever since 9/11? Hasn't that been that's like the one civic tribute that we pay in the United States, left, right, center, as we say to a military person, thank you for your service. Obviously, we're not saying that to law enforcement, since an enormous number of influential people seem to think that law enforcement in the United States is evil, even though it's a kind of domestic, analogy to the military, since they're also on the front lines every day defending us against, depredations. Trump's got you're saying, it's a little too much. He is a little too much. He's always a little too much.
I don't mind the army celebrating its birthday. The point is that what Trump does is also, because it's his birthday too, and we know this because he tried to do this in the first term. That's the part that I don't like. I'm like, let's celebrate our military. I love our military. My relatives are in our military. It's that Trump wants to co-opt it. It's all got to go through the prism of his ego. And I don't like that.
He draws the psychosis. He is this amazing. He has this amazing talent for making elites in the United States oppose a military parade or support attacks on law enforcement, implicitly support attacks on law enforcement officers, or say it's okay not to enforce immigration law. He's getting that from them, and they're walking themselves off a plank, as far as I can tell.
I mean, in 2020, the thing that Joe Biden did that was so effective, and maybe now we know why, because maybe he didn't even really understand the questions he was being asked by reporters, in the pool. But in the 2020 election, the effective thing he did was, people would say, hey, Mr. Vice President, your opponent in this election says that he wanted to take 6 porpoises and smack you with the 6 porpoises one by one, holding them by the tail, whatever. And Biden would just go, oh, that guy. It was like Biden's version of there he goes again, there you go again. And that was actually effective because there were so many times that Biden didn't take the bait, and people really liked that because at a certain point, not every show you watch on TV can be WWF wrestling, right? I mean, it's entertaining for the hour that it is the week, per week. But they need to be able to do this now and say, geez, boy, this guy, and kind of roll their eyes at him more. And I really think that will make a difference. But as long as he knows he can draw them into these scenarios, he's going to do it.
He's not. We give him too much credit. He didn't engineer any of this stuff. He's merely responding to circumstances here. I'm very receptive to arguments that Trump can overreach, that his instincts are terrible. I agree. But I struggle to imagine how he could overplay this hand and make the protesters and their supporters look sympathetic.
No,
maybe
but
it's a failure of imagination on my part, but I cannot conceive of it.
No, I'm not saying that he is that he is engineering this. This is not my beloved show Andor. He did not organize the resistance on Gorman to be bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is he has a talent for turning his enemies into the worst versions of themselves, to do self-destructive things, and to make his life easier. That's what I think is going on here. And I will say that there will never be another Democrat in the White House. The Democrat that is next in the White House will embrace Trump's immigration agenda. I don't know how it happens. So many interest groups are in such horrible, order in relation to this, and that it would be very difficult to thread that needle. But there is no way, this is like Law and Order stuff, there is no way that somebody who says that it's okay for people to be here illegally and it's okay to attack the officers who put their lives on the line to deport them are bad. It's just not going to happen. You can't have this idea that it's okay for lawlessness is acceptable.
Well, you just couldn't have. You can't have it around this issue. You can have it. We had it around racial issues, though. In 2020, lawlessness was fine.
Well, I don't think it was fine. I mean, I think
not with me, but I mean,
no, but I think the overall part of the problem here is that Trump was president in 2020, and the lawlessness happened on his watch, and he said, "I'm against it," but then he didn't do anything to quell it. That was part of what you said yesterday, was that, this is the do-over, because in 2020 he talked the talk, but he didn't walk the walk.
I totally agree, but there's a much broader and deeper sympathy and panic in American minds about race and our history, and the sympathy was with,
fair enough,
ultimately the
well, or there was just a cultural demand that everybody feels sympathetic, and we all saw the footage, George Floyd, and all that.
There was fear, there was intimidation, there was a culture of reciprocity, and you knew there were tangible consequences for running afoul of this moral panic. It's all gone.
See that, right? Anyway, I think the moral panic that you're talking about, Democrats are now going to experience what it's like for people to look at them and have a moral panic about them. By which I mean, these people are crazy. They are. I'm scared of them because this is going on in LA and nobody's stopping it.
They don't mind if bad things happen to me and my family.
Everything in 2020 had the COVID overhang. COVID was the only subject on anybody's mind. All of this, we were interested in the law and order consequences of everything, and so was the right and all of that. But that was not what was going on. People were like, can I leave my house? Are my kids going to be on Zoom at school forever? Can I visit is it okay for me to see my mother who is 70 and has diabetes, or am I going to kill her? And then all this other stuff was going on. There is no other stuff going on in the United States. This is now what's going on. The news story in the United States is LA. Tell me another one. The tariffs right now aren't a news story. What's going on with the Iranian negotiations is not a news story. LA is the news story. It is not good for the people who are not on the side of law enforcement. I'm sorry. I wish it were more interesting than that. I wish that it were more flavored than that, because it would be more interesting to talk about in some fashion. But it isn't. Abe, I believe you have a recommendation for the first time in a long time.
I do. So I recommended a while ago on the podcast one of my favorite movies, which is from 1971, Australian movie called Wake in Fright, which comes from this period of really inventive, dark Australian filmmaking, where it's like people fighting for their lives, in the outback, from either fighting nature or something supernatural or an evil person or whatever it is. And Wake in Fright is amazing. So someone had recommended to me that I see the new Nicolas Cage movie, The Surfer, based on my appreciation for Wake in Fright. And he is right. The Surfer is a complete homage to that period and that type of Australian movie, and particularly to Wake in Fright. It's directed by Lorcan Finnegan, and it takes place in Australia. And Nicolas Cage is a father of a teenage boy who's coming back to his hometown in Australia, where he wants to take his boy surfing, like he used to go surfing when he was a kid. And he's all set to purchase his childhood home there. And there's a gang of locals on the beach who, as they say, you don't live here, don't serve here. And they bully him, they bully his kid, and he gets sort of stuck there, dealing with them and dealing with trying to buy this house. And the situation devolves, and he sort of falls apart. And I won't tell you what happens after that, but it's exciting, it's fun, it's a very, very accurate homage to really to Wake and Fright, because Wake and Fright is this all takes place over the Christmas holiday in Australia, and just like Wake and Fright does, which is about a school teacher who was leaving, going back to his hometown by train for over Christmas, and he gets stuck in a town full of like violent gamblers, and he gets sort of roped in and loses everything there. Nicolas Cage, as an actor, I'm sort of indifferent to him. I mean, people sort of love him or hate him. I find him interesting, and he takes interesting roles sometimes, but he takes so many roles that some of them are bound to be interesting. I'm not sure he was the best cast for this, but he pulls it off.
So
just
I'm actually glad that you did this recommendation and you said that, because I wouldn't have known from any of the advertising or any of the chatter about it that this was what you say, this homage to this, or at least that it had its roots there, because I looked at it and saw what's happening now is Nicolas Cage is, and I like him, but what's happening is he's now playing a surfer. He just played a butcher. Tomorrow he's going to play the baker, and then the next movie is going to be the candlestick maker. And it's just Nicolas Cage being Nicolas Cage, but having every type of job that a normal person has, except as Nicolas Cage. That's what it seems like. And what you're describing is far more complex and far more engaging.
Yeah.
2 questions.
Go ahead.
1, how's the Australian accent?
He doesn't have one at all.
Even though it's his hometown in Australia?
Yeah, he was raised.
Okay, good. That's good. Okay,
the character was not raised there after.
Okay, that's good. Second of all, Seth, you're being unfair to Nicolas Cage. He does take a lot of jobs because he owes the IRS like $200 squillion and has no. I mean, he literally has one of those tax bills you wouldn't believe. But in the last couple of years, he's made a couple of really wonderful movies, particularly one called Pig, which is about a restaurateur in Northern California, which was maybe the best movie of 2023, and he gave maybe the best performance in 2023, but the company that released it did not stage an Oscar campaign for him, which might have worked. And he was part of this terrible version of Dracula, this comic Renfield, which is a sort of black comedy about, with Renfield rather than Dracula as the center and Cage as Dracula. But the gimmick in Renfield is that Dracula is a toxic boss, an impossible, crazy boss whom you cannot satisfy and who terrifies you at every turn, because sometimes he's nice and then he'll go and literally go for your jugular. And it is a great comic turn in an otherwise disastrous movie. So I am not a fan of Nicolas Cage, but he's having a pretty good 60s, I have to say. Not 90s.
And he played himself.
Well, I don't think he's crazy. That's
no, not in Renfield. I mean, he did a movie where he played himself
with Pedro Pascal, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, where he's
something
like
Pedro
Pascal.
Incredible talent.
Man of singular talent, or some kind of an amazing feat of singular talent, something like that. Anyway, Noah Rothman, as always, great to have you back. And, you're here, we're here. Don't be a stranger. And for Seth, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.